For a decade, Lake Shelton lived behind invisible walls no one could break through. Not friends, not mentors, not the very leaders who once believed he was the future of worship music. To everyone watching his rise, Blake seemed untouchable, confident, steady, gifted, and deeply grounded. But the truth he carried was nothing like the image the world saw. It was heavier, darker, and so personal that even he didn't fully understand how much it had reshaped him until the moment everything came spilling out. On a quiet Sunday morning, with the sanctuary packed and every voice ready for worship, Blake stepped forward with a shaking hand and eyes full of fear. He wasn't even supposed to speak that day. He was there to lead songs, not spill secrets. But something inside him broke, and the words he had buried for 10 painful years finally rose to the surface. He took a trembling breath, stared at the crowd, and whispered, "I can't keep this inside anymore." Instantly, the room froze. And that moment became the start of a confession that would expose the truth he had been carrying alone for a decade. But the reason behind his silence didn't begin on that stage. It started on a night 10 years earlier, when a single phone call destroyed everything he thought he knew about his own life. When Blake vanished from ministry, people didn't hold back their theories. They created stories, filled in blanks, and spread whispers that grew into full-blown rumors. Some said he walked away because he couldn't handle the pressure. Others claimed he was hiding a mistake, a scandal, or something he didn't want anyone to discover. A few said he simply lost passion, while others went deeper, insisting he fell out of faith. Online discussions turned into speculation chains, with people analyzing every appearance, every absence, every small detail. Something happened behind the scenes, some insisted. He offended someone powerful, others said. There were even dramatic claims floating around, none based on fact, all based on imagination. But the truth wasn't a scandal, an argument, or a moral failure. It wasn't rebellion or hidden wrongdoing, not. It was something far more personal and far more devastating, and it came to light on the night. Blake received the phone call that shattered his identity. Blake never forgot that night. He was alone in his apartment, enjoying a quiet evening, not expecting anything unusual. Then his phone buzzed. The number on the screen belonged to someone he trusted deeply, someone whose voice had always brought comfort. So he answered without hesitation. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but to Blake, it felt like his entire life stretched and collapsed inside that short window of time. The voice on the other end revealed a truth that had been hidden from him since the day he was born, something so big, so life-altering that everyone around him had helped keep it secret. Blake remembered the exact moment the words sank in. He dropped the phone, sat motionless on the floor, and stared at nothing. It felt like the ground beneath him had split open. Everything he believed about who he was, where he came from, and what his family represented suddenly felt like a story written by someone else. "I realized," he later said, "that my entire life was built on a foundation that wasn't real." But the truth didn't stop there. What he learned that night was only the first layer of a deeper family secret. With the church silent and every eye fixed on him, Blake admitted the part he had kept buried for 10 years. "That night," he said slowly, "I found out the man I called my father wasn't my real father." Gasps echoed across the sanctuary. Some people covered their mouths. Others looked around in shock, as if trying to confirm they heard him correctly. Even the pastor, usually steady and calm, lowered his head in disbelief. Blake had never imagined that the truth of his own identity could crumble with one sentence. Yet there he was confessing something that had torn him. Apart for a decade, but what he revealed next made the room even more tense, because the identity of his real father was a subject the family never wanted to touch. The truth about Blake's biological father wasn't simple. According to what Blake later learned from relatives, And what people close to the family quietly hinted over the years, his real father had a troubled history. Reports claimed he had lived a complicated life, full of personal battles and past issues that Blake's family didn't want attached to him. Rumors floated through extended family circles for years, but none of them ever reached Blake. They were buried intentionally, guarded by relatives who believed they were protecting him from pain. His family thought that distancing Blake from his biological father would give him a stable upbringing, a clean slate, and a future free from the shadows of someone else's mistakes. And for years, that secret held, until the night it all fell apart. But the hardest moment wasn't the discovery itself. It was the conversation that came right after. After the phone call, Blake's mother came to his apartment. She didn't just knock. She clung to him the moment he opened the door, crying so hard she could barely breathe. They sat on the couch, and she held his hands as her tears fell onto his skin. And then she told him everything. She revealed the circumstances of his birth, the fear that surrounded those early years, the decision to keep the truth hidden so he could grow up without chaos, judgment, or constant questions. Her voice shook as she said the words that haunted him for years. I was afraid. Afraid you would hate me. Afraid you'd leave. Afraid the church would judge us. Blake didn't lash out. He didn't push her away. But inside, he felt himself breaking piece by piece. Because in that moment, he saw the truth behind her lie. She didn't hide things out of selfishness. She hid them because she loved him so deeply that she feared the cost of honesty. Still, the damage was done. And Blake's inner collapse was only beginning. People assumed Blake's disappearance from ministry had something to do with burnout, conflict, or a private mistake. But none of those theories were true. Blake left because he couldn't stand in front of a church and preach about identity, faith, or purpose while secretly questioning everything about himself. How could I lead people, he later admitted, when I didn't even know who I was? He didn't lose passion. He lost himself. His confidence was gone. His grounding was gone. Even his spiritual balance faded. He tried to fake strength for a while, but every time he stepped onto a stage, he felt like an imposter wearing someone else's skin. He didn't walk away from ministry. He fell out of the version of himself he had been raised to believe in. And once he fell, he didn't know how to climb back. But the next decade would become even darker. Blake spent the next 10 years living in a quiet personal storm. While outsiders whispered and speculated, he was fighting to hold himself together. He went to therapy, months turning into years, just trying to understand the emotional weight he had carried without knowing it. He pulled away from friends, from church members, even from the people he loved most. Not because he stopped caring, but because he didn't know how to explain the chaos inside him. He struggled with trust. If the people he trusted most had hidden something so big, who else could he rely on? The feeling of betrayal seeped into every relationship. And spiritually, he went through one of the hardest seasons of his life. He admitted that there were months when he didn't want to pray, didn't want to sing, and didn't want anything to do with worship. His faith wasn't gone. It was wounded. And he didn't know how to heal it. As Blake spoke, the church didn't judge him. Many were openly crying. Because this wasn't a story about rebellion. It was a story about survival. But the final and most painful chapter was still ahead. Once, Blake processed enough of the truth to start looking for answers. He began the difficult journey of trying to find his biological father. But that path was full of walls. Some relatives warned him not to dig into the past, saying it would only bring pain. Others acted like they knew nothing, even when Blake could tell they were hiding something. And some simply shut the conversation down completely. When Blake finally reached the point of contacting the man himself, something happened that cut deeper than he expected. His real father refused to respond. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored. The silence said everything. I had to accept, Blake later said, that I had to heal without answers. That realization became the turning point in his story. Not the end of pain, but the beginning of finally releasing the weight he had carried for so long. When Blake stepped onto that church stage after 10 years of silence, he wasn't looking for sympathy. He wasn't trying to shock anyone. He was finally freeing himself from a secret that had crushed him for most of his life. His confession wasn't about exposing his family. It was about reclaiming his identity. The truth didn't break him. The silence did. And by speaking out, he began the slow, painful, beautiful process of rebuilding the person he lost 10 years ago. Blake's story isn't about scandal or shame. It's about a man who had to lose everything he thought he was in order to discover who he could become. And as the sanctuary watched him stand there trembling, they didn't see a broken man. They saw someone finally brave enough to face the truth. Because sometimes the most powerful healing begins the moment you stop hiding the wounds you never asked for.